Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Conversation Starters panel. My name is Julie Kane. I'm the collection strategist at Washington and Lee University, and I'll be moderating this session. These buzzy books with compelling topics are sure to inspire great book club conversation. Let's dig in. I am thrilled to welcome Nathan Harris with Amity, My Little Brown and Company, Hachette. This is the story of an emancipated brother and sister, Coleman and June, and their long and eventful journey to find true freedom. Bruce Holsinger with Culpability by Spiegel and Grau, where artificial intelligence and family suspense collide in a surprising variety of ways. Mirta Ojito with Deeper Than the Ocean by Union Square and Co. From a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, this gorgeous multi-generational debut novel explores connections between the Canary Islands, Cuba, a 100-year-old shipwreck, and family lore. Sarah Penner with The Amalfi Curse by Park Row, HTP, takes us on a journey to Positano, exploring treacherous shipwrecks, local legends of sea witches, and the allure of treasure hunting under the growing threat of volcanic activity. And Ellen Marie Wiseman with The Lies They Told by Kensington. Through the eyes of a young immigrant mother, we see the painful journey of to a life in 1930s America, where the fight against the growing eugenics movement is immediate. Each of these stories possesses that book club appeal. They are thought-provoking, compelling reads that prompt that drive for book chat. Some commonalities among these stories include the existential struggle to be heard, to be understood, to strive for peace and freedom, and sometimes, now I'm stealing from Amity, the dignity of answering to no one. Nathan, since I'm calling on the dignity of answering to no one as it shows up in Amity, can you speak to how and where that drive appears in your novel?
Yeah. So to situate the novel historically, it takes place 2 years after the Civil War ends. So Coleman's character, I mean, really, he has only known enslavement or being a servant to the Harper family. So in writing his character, I was just really thinking about what that must have been like. His entire life revolves around, serving them. That's his first waking thought and the thought he has going to sleep, and how hard that must have been. And, there's different ideas of freedom at play here. And I think more than anything, with someone like him, it might be one thing to be free, but he wants time. He wants to just have time to be, to not have the specter of the family constantly on his mind and, kind of controlling him. And especially Coleman, I love spending time with Coleman. He's a very, very complex and interesting person and curious. He's a very curious person. You get these little moments during the novel where you learn about his interests, and he's taking care of Mrs. Harper's garden, but you get the sense that he enjoys it. He would like to garden. Certainly reading more and writing more. There's even one moment where he sees the printing press in town and he's fascinated by the printing press. He's going on and on about it. So, someone like that, it becomes clear that given time, he could really, really cultivate these interests. And I think he knows he has so much potential to, I don't know, become this evolved version of himself, and he could really, really blossom. But in order to do that, he needs that, not just freedom, I guess, but peace, peace to not have to worry about his surroundings. And I think he deserves that. And it's the catalyst for him moving forward, alongside, of course, making sure that his sister has peace as well. And, having closure there. And I think between that freedom and that peace, he can finally find happiness, but it'll be a long road to get there.
Thank you so much. I have to express, like, Coleman is such a lovely, complex character, and it's so just delightful to be his ally through his journey. Thanks for writing them so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Bruce, Your novel is thoroughly immediate, and your use of the present tense really effectively heightens that sense of momentum. The struggle to be heard, to be believed, to be understood, that appears in the jump in culpability. Can you tell us about managing perspectives and each character's differing needs?
Sure. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank everyone for being here. And it's amazing to be with my fellow panelists on this program. Yeah, point of view is so difficult when I teach fiction writing. I always tell my students this is one of the most crucial decisions you have to make. It's one of the most personal decisions. And my last few novels have been in multiple points of view, kind of sprawling in a way. And this is the first time I've written in a single person's point of view and in the present, and in first person and in the present tense. And that creates kind of challenges of its own. And one of the reasons that I did that, this character Noah, who's the dad in this family that has the novel begins with this kind of horrifying accident in a self-driving car. And then the suspense of the novel is about culpability and artificial intelligence and moral responsibility, and how those issues kind of intercut and interlace through this family. And so Noah, he the point of view, both the tense and I think the the fact that it's in first person is that I'm really trying to um, think about his own ignorance of what's going on around him. And at the same time, I do try to bring in, through various elements in the book, other people's points of view. One of his daughters is engaged in a pretty intense text relationship with a chatbot. There was a piece in the New York Times just yesterday about chatbots and what they're doing to our psychology. There's a kind of tech mogul, a billionaire figure, a slightly more benevolent Elon Musk type. And I even created kind of a fake New Yorker interview with him. So you'd see on the page what his point of view mediated through that interview. And then you also, I think most importantly, the mother in this family, her name is Lorelei Shaw, and she's this kind of MacArthur level genius award-winning expert in the ethics of artificial intelligence. So this dilemma comes home to her in these really poignant ways. And the way I get her point of view on the page is through excerpts from her book on the ethics of artificial intelligence and what it's doing to us. So, point of view is always so difficult, so challenging. But for me, it's one of the pleasures of writing a novel is figuring out whose story I'm going to be telling, how limited their knowledge might be, and how we're going to hear from other people that are important to the main character's life. So that's how I tried to handle those things.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Yeah, I have to add that the way that Noah interacts with his family members and the other people in the story, that kind of juxtaposition with excerpts from Lorelei's work just really fleshes out where the disconnects are. And I think it's a stellar work. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Mirta, the 100-year span between parallel narratives in your work speaks to the persistent need to consider these questions. What do you want? And how can you live your life while honoring obligations? There's this poignant moment where Catalina is asked what she wants to do. And that question itself is revealing. Even her favorite people rarely ask her personal preferences. Would you share with us your approach to this pivotal question in relation to both Catalina and Mara?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. This is a wonderful event. For context, I should say that my book is about one woman's search for her roots and her ancestors, and her quest for belonging to something bigger than her very small family. This woman is a journalist named Mara, and she's had many losses in her life. Her country, which she left when she was 15, her husband, who was the love of her life, and he died quite young and unexpectedly, her father, her job, her home in New York, and to a certain extent, her son, who's gone to college, and that also is a form of loss. But that she doesn't always know who she is at the cellular level. She knows what she wants, and she's able to articulate it. By contrast, the other equally important character in the book is Catalina, the one you mentioned. Catalina is the great-grandmother of Mara, and she lived at a time when women were told what to do and were not expected to have thoughts, opinions, or even go to school. And thus Catalina obeys her parents in all things, including whom to love. And eventually she obeys her husband and allows him to take her away from everything she knows and loves. That, as you may imagine, leads to disaster. In her case, an unimaginable loss. It is at that exact moment of the loss when a man who was a little more evolved than her father had been, asked her, "What do you want to do, Catalina?" And the question strikes her as original and surprising, and also welcomed, because at that moment, for the first time, she knows what to do and what she wants. That question and her answer is really the beginning of her life at 19. The year is 1919, and she, in many ways, is born again. She becomes her own person after that and in charge of her destiny. It was important for me to reflect in my book the way women lived at the beginning of the 20th century. Deeper Than the Ocean, I was inspired by my mother, who definitely had a lot of opinions and was not shy to relate them. And the stories she told me about her own mother, who sadly died long before she could understand that she had choices. My grandmother's life was a life of work, sacrifice, children. She had 5, a demanding husband, and lived in conditions that, to our modern sensibilities, definitely seem abysmal. And that, frankly, surprisingly, in the end, was the story that I wanted to tell. That's not how the book started, but it's how it ended. I'd like to think that by writing this book, I'm rescuing my grandmother, whose name was also Catalina, and I'm giving meaning to her life and the life of women like her. She died young at 40, not knowing much about the world or even the country she lived in, Cuba. But she had a daughter who, unlike her, learned to read and write, my mother. And my mother instilled in me the love of reading. And many years later, here I am, Catalina's granddaughter, and the author of 3 books. So that's something. And with my book, I want to honor that, and women like her, not for me, but for them.
Thank you so much, Mirta. I think you do a lovely job honoring women of that time. Sarah, can you tell us a bit about how this struggle shows up for the women we meet in your parallel timelines? This, Strege?
Yep.
Don't tell Duolingo.
Strege, either is fine.
The Strega community has obligations to each other and to the outside world. Can you tell us a bit more about the tensions here between autonomy and obligation?
Definitely. So first of all, thank you, Julie, and to everyone who's on this call. I think this is my 3rd Library Journal Day of Dialogue. I'll never forget my first one. I was on a panel with Kristen Hanna, and it was during the pandemic, and thousands of people had to listen to me talk, but they were there for her. So I always have fond memories of this event. So my book that comes out in less than 2 weeks is The Amalfi Curse. This is my 3rd novel. It is historical fiction with elements of magic and mystery, just like readers have come to love and expect from my debut, The Lost Apothecary, and my sophomore novel, The London Seance Society. So this is a departure, though, because as you just said, Julie, we're talking about sea witches, and this book takes place off the coast of Positano, whereas my first 2 books were London. So it's dual timeline. I've got this woman, her name is Mari, and she's the leader by birthright of this coven of sea witches in 1821. And much like we've been talking about, she's somewhat torn between her responsibility to her community and her coven. They're essentially responsible for protecting this small fishing village, which Positano was a small fishing village during the early 1800s. They protect it from pirates, from collapses, from floods. And the irony is that Mari, although she is the most powerful witch of the sea in this village, she actually loathes the ocean and views it as a villain because it has taken from her the 2 people she loved the most. So we see her throughout the story kind of grappling with caring for her community, but also bearing the burden of this secret, which is that she doesn't really love this thing she has control over. And I really think that that is relevant and relatable, especially for women today, because often we find ourselves, whether it's through cultural or societal expectations, we need to be the perfect daughter or mother or friend or wife. And sometimes we have our own pursuits and passions and preferences that don't really align with those perfectly set out roles. Similarly, my present day character in the story, her name is Haven. She's a nautical archaeologist and she excavates shipwrecks. And she is investigating this cluster of mysterious shipwrecks just off the coast of Positano. And she's there with a group of other women nautical archaeologists, and they have this project underway. But Haven also has a secret, which is that her father, who passed away a year earlier, he found something on his last scuba dive of this exact area that he told Haven about, and he requested that she go retrieve this very valuable thing for him. But Haven can't tell her fellow divers and archaeologists because she doesn't want them to question her motives. So through her pursuit of this professional obligation, again, she has a secret too. So a lot of the exploration in this book is about women and what's asked and expected of us, compared to what's in our hearts that we feel the need to keep secret and protect. So I hope that readers resonate with it. And I'm very excited for this book to come out to the world in 2 short weeks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think you phrased all of that so beautifully. And that pull sort of between identities that have been foisted on you or that you have inherited and what your true desires are, that just absolutely comes out and shines through. And I can't wait for people to talk about all of these. It's fantastic. So Ellen, loss of autonomy or the threatened loss of autonomy pervades your novel. Lena Conti and her family struggle to comprehend this new culture and new threats, the labeling of citizens and immigrants alike as defective, feeble-minded, a drain on society. Ramifications for that judgment are extreme. Would you talk to us a bit about writing this fear into the novel?
Sure. Thank you again for having me, Julie, and it's nice to meet all of you other authors on this panel. Like I said, this is my first time talking about this book, and there's a lot of facts and stuff. So I have some notes. But yes, the life or the lies they told comes out in July 29th, and it's set in the 1930s, and it's about a young immigrant mother who has dreams of a better life in America, but those dreams are shattered by the eugenics movement, which is, the belief that anyone deemed unfit or defective should be institutionalized or sterilized. As for writing fear into the novel, I really wanted to make sure that my main character was the one experiencing all these threats instead, as opposed to writing about someone who's maybe helping someone get through this time. So as soon as she steps foot in America, she's faced with the threat of deportation. She's faced with the threat of losing her 2-year-old daughter or being separated from her. She's faced with the threat of being labeled defective, either mentally or physically. She's threatened with being labeled a burden to society and deported. And her brother is actually with her and her mother, and her brother is actually labeled as feeble-minded. So he gets deported. He's either has to be deported or else he's going to be committed for the rest of his life to the psychiatric pavilion on Ellis Island. So because he's younger than her, the mother has to go back. So now Lena is on her own in this new country, and she hopes that now that she's in the United States, she's safe. But on Ellis Island, she's given these IQ tests, which they ask some really silly questions like, is it better to sweep the stairs from the top or the bottom? And show her a picture of a woman and say, is this a lady or a dog? And of course, she's given medical exams. So when she enters the US and she reaches her destination in the Blue Ridge Mountains, she's upset to find out that the children who are under her care are hiding from, they're being taught to hide from the sheriff when he comes to the door or any strangers. And she eventually realizes that the reasons these children are hiding is some of the same reasons, the same threats that she faced on Ellis Island. And because despite the mountain people being US citizens, they're being labeled as feeble-minded and ignorant and illiterate and unhealthy because the government wants to take their land and evict them from their land so that they can form the Shenandoah National Park. So eventually, she learns that the government is also trying to take children and sterilizing them or institutionalizing them or redistributing them to be brought up in a more appropriate home by an elite family. So, you know, during the eugenics movement, that happened all over the country. Any family that was deemed socially inadequate, their kids would be taken away. So after a social worker from the eugenics office labels Lena as feeble-minded and promiscuous, you know, her worst fears come true. And so all these threats that she's been fighting against, she has to face them head on now. And she has to fight for herself and her daughter and the children under care against people who want to eliminate them. So I just wanted to make sure that she experienced all of these things. You know, the eugenics movement was such a huge topic that it was hard to like narrow it down to make sure my main character experienced as many of those things as I could come up with.
Thanks so much, Ellen. It's a compelling read with modern ties that are a little scary. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Everyone, voyages and disasters play big roles in these books. There are oceans, sea voyages, shipwrecks, car crashes. Can you each take a moment to tell us about how these big moments or movements took shape in your novel? Nathan, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. You know, for Coleman, you know, he finally learns of what's happened to his sister June. She has been pretty much taken from the family by the patriarch of the family, Mr. Harper. And they have decamped for Mexico after the Union won the war, sort of fleeing persecution. And they moved there to start a new community. And she's effectively abducted. So Coleman, with the family, finally meets a mysterious man at their doorstep telling them that they are ready to be received in Mexico. And they're going to take a voyage to get there. And I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but that is sort of the beginning of the story for Coleman and trying to find his sister June. And yeah, that's sort of the, I don't know, the defining moment of what happens, but I don't want to give anything away, so I don't know what else to say about it, but it's yeah, it's important for sure.
Understandable, and I don't want to give anything away either. Voyage is important. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, so I have always been fascinated by shipwrecks, and shipwrecks, of course, play a huge role in my story. In the very first chapter, my present day character, we learn that she's off to explore this cluster of shipwrecks. And I think that it's always been a popular obsession of readers. And, you know, just on Hulu the other night, I watched this Titanic Resurrected feature, which I recommend everybody checks out. They essentially created a three-dimensional rendering of the Titanic with by combining all of these images. So I think that culturally, shipwrecks have always been really fascinating. And when I ask myself why, it's like a time capsule, except that unlike traditional archaeology, where you may be digging in sand or dirt, when something is under the water, oftentimes it's largely preserved and we're able to explore it. My husband and I have been scuba diving for almost 12 years, and we have gone diving in lots of shipwrecks in the Florida Keys. And I even distinctly remember once kind of swimming through the shipwreck and seeing all of these lobster skeletons where they had molted. And I would never have that experience if I hadn't taken the time to get certified and go explore. So for a historical novelist who also loves elements of mystery, a shipwreck was a perfect setting to kind of hide a few things that connect my present day narrative to my historical narrative and sort of bury some of those secrets in the wreck that my present day character can then unbury. So I love reading books about shipwrecks. My nautical and maritime history section of my bookshelf is one of the biggest topics on my shelf. So I've always been kind of into that. So it was so much fun writing a book in which I got to create my own shipwrecks and tell my own story.
Oh, thanks so much. It's delightful to find out about your personal scuba diving experience. And I love, there's a moment where I think you refer to the tech that's assisting the nautical archaeology as photogrammetry on steroids or something similar. And such a lovely explanation. And it's just something that's great to dive into.
Thank you.
Bruce, how about you?
Yeah, so the accident that begins Culpability is much more mundane than a shipwreck, and I wish I were a scuba diver. But this is it's a family of 5 in a minivan, but the question that drives the novel is about responsibility. Who or what is responsible for the accident that happens? And that ends up being the thread that runs through the entire book. And you asked a question earlier, Julie, about autonomy. And that was actually the book ended up being called Culpability, but the title that I was thinking about for a while was Autonomy, because artificial intelligence is different agents in AI are becoming more and more autonomous, even as we're losing some of our autonomy. And to me, that seemed like a really interesting theme to explore. It's not a futuristic novel at all. It's not dystopian. It's very much set in our own moment. And that accident becomes a kind of metaphor for so much of what's happening to this family. There's a much more analog accident that happens later in the novel, which like Nathan, I won't reveal that, but that becomes the contrast between those two catastrophes is kind of what makes everyone reflect on their own responsibility for what's happening around them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I love that the working title was Autonomy. I see both. Yeah, that's fantastic. Mirta, would you like to take a stab at this?
Yes, actually, I was thinking that such a coincidence, because one of the shipwrecks that Sarah may have seen while she was diving was the Valvanera, which is off the coast of Key West, and that's the ship I'm writing about. The shipwreck of the Valvanera is the central anecdote of the book. In fact, the whole idea of the book came to me in, I'm embarrassed to say, 2006. It's taken me a long time. I was taking a stroll in Key West, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a coffee table book. In fact, I have it right here. It's always next to me. This book. Can't really see it. But anyway, the title's in Spanish, which was unusual at that time in Key West. It's called El Misterio del Valvanera, or The Mystery of the Valvanera. It was on sale for $20, so I went ahead and bought it. And then I started reading immediately, and I was fascinated to learn about this shipwreck, 1919 shipwreck, known to history as the poor man's Titanic, because it was full of immigrants from Spain. I knew nothing about this, nothing at all, even though I've lived in Florida for 45 years on and off, and I lived in Cuba for the first 16 years of my life. The Mystery of the Valvanera tells the story of the ship that left Spain on its way to the Americas at a time when men and women, but mostly men, were coming to this side of the Atlantic to have better lives, not unlike what people continue doing now in different ways. The ship had scheduled 2 stops in Cuba, one in Santiago de Cuba and another one in Havana. While it was traveling from Santiago de Cuba, where it did stop to Havana, a horrible, devastating hurricane developed, the 1919 hurricane. At that time, they didn't have names. And the ship didn't make it. 488 people were lost. And the mystery is that their bodies were never found. When I read that, I became incredibly curious because one detail is important. More people than were expected got out in the first stop, not the second. So I thought, if you wanted to disappear, if you didn't tell your family that you were alive, that you, in fact, had gotten out earlier before the shipwreck, what would happen? And why would you want to do that? And that is the seed of the entire plot of the book. And it very much has to do with the anonymity of migrating and how we can easily get lost.
Thank you so much, Mirta. That's beautiful. Ellen, want to round us out?
Sure. Well, I've always really been fascinated by the voyages of immigrants, you know, that had to be down in steerage, down in the dark bowels of the ship and with, you know, no fresh air and little food and very unsanitary conditions. And, you know, this is one of the first things that Lena experiences after she leaves home. I don't really write about it, but it's in her memories that she thinks about. But she thinks that this is the scariest part of her voyage. And, you know, once she gets to Ellis Island, she realizes, you know, that that was not the worst thing that happened. And also the other reason that I've been really interested in that is because my mother came over by ship alone from Germany in 1957. She wasn't in steerage, but I think she maybe was in first class. But so she, you know, it took 11 days to come over, and she came by herself at 20 years old. And when I was 2 years old, I went to Germany and back by ship. I don't remember it, but so I've always really been fascinated by, you know, the bravery of these immigrants that would, you know, um, make that voyage and be in those really hard conditions.
Thank you so much. There are eugenic themes at play in both The Lies They Told and in Amity. Ellen, your novel brings front and center the eugenics movement in the US and spotlights a historical context that, again, feels terrifyingly necessary today. Can you speak to your approach to the storytelling on this topic?
Sure. I first became interested in eugenics when I was writing my World War II novel, The Plum Tree, because you know, I discovered that the US was the leader in the eugenics movement, and it was the first country in the world to undertake sterilization policies. And, you know, then I realized that the Nazis actually took many of the American eugenicist policies, procedures, and theories. After a top American eugenicist wrote a book called The Passing of the Great Race, Hitler sent him a fan letter and said, "This book is my Bible." So as soon as Hitler came to power, one of the first things that he did was pass eugenics laws. And then while researching two of my other novels, I continued to find connections because those stories are about institutions that were built to isolate and many cases sterilize people that were considered a burden or a threat to the American gene pool. So the other thing that I learned is that the most commonly suggested method of getting rid of inferior people in the United States was local gas chambers. And the eugenicists realized that, you know, the American public was not ready to take this on. So some doctors in institutions found ways to practice eugenicide. by when they had incoming patients, they would feed them milk infected with tuberculosis, reasoning that genetically fit patients would survive. And other doctors just practiced eugenicide by different forms of lethal neglect. And I learned that, eugenics theories have played such a significant role in the history and the culture of the United States, with marriage laws and segregation laws and immigration laws. And, it's a dark time in history to look back on, but 31 states in the United States, including Washington, D.C., still have allow forced sterilization of immigrants and the incarcerated and the disabled. So all of that, the reason I say all that is because it's such a huge topic. And like I said before, it was really hard to just narrow it down to have a lot of these things happen to one character. So I needed to make sure, those beliefs and those actions affected Lena in the lies that were told. And so while this story, it tells the story of one woman's dream for a better life being shattered by eugenics, I included the inspection process at Ellis Island because, that was kind of like the beginnings where she first encounters it. They were measuring people's noses and ears and everything to make sure that they fit this American ideal. And I included the displacement of the Blue Ridge Mountain people because those are two of many instances where eugenics has been used against immigrants and American citizens alike. So that was my approach to the whole storytelling. It was really, really hard to get everything I wanted to say in there. So that's why I really included a lot of the information in the back of the book and the author's note and the reader's guide and stuff, because I had a lot to say and it was hard to fit it all in the story.
Understandable. Thank you so much. Nathan, I was so taken by Coleman's approach to negotiating the custody of Oliver, using sort of eugenic tropes to his advantage. Can you talk a little bit about tackling like normalized ideas of purity and the best, the finest to further Coleman's story?
Yeah. I'm not sure the word eugenics ever came to mind when I was writing, and it certainly isn't as central as it is for Ellen's work, but I totally understand the question. It made me think about my novel in a new way. I think Coleman is very much a product of his environment and the times. And, he's been told his whole life by Mr. Harper, who's a very cruel person. And then just, the individuals he's been loaned out to, whomever it may be, that he's, lesser than, that he's stupid, that lazy, lacks initiative, whatever it may be. And above all, that he's inferior, So I think he's really internalized that in a way that he's not even quite aware of. And, when you meet him on the page and the way he talks, he talks in a very sort of elegant manner. I think he tries to, put on a performance as something of a dandy even, which isn't what people expect from someone who is a freed slave. But that's just his way of, trying to grapple with these insecurities. And to circle back, I think with Oliver, his dog, he's sort of I don't know, transposed those insecurities onto Oliver in a way, but sort of inverted them. I think where Coleman sees himself as stupid at times, he's happy to talk about how Oliver's the smartest dog in the world, or when he feels cowardly, when he's afraid to make this trip to Mexico to find his sister. He looks at Oliver, and Oliver's running around acting crazy, and Oliver's courageous dog, and you could go on, but I think in a way their relationship, it's transactional in the sense that he can, put those insecurities onto Oliver and look at it as a strength and almost a way to look up to Oliver. But not to put a dark cloud on their relationship. You know, at the end of the day, I love the complexity of what they share. And you know, Oliver, as with so many pets that we have, is just that dog to get him through the tough days, you know. But I do really like that question because it made me think of their relationship in a new way.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I loved that juxtaposition, and the two of them together is heartwarming. AI is rapidly becoming inescapable, and one of our panel's novels tackles it head on. In Culpability, AI is a central character. So Bruce, can you speak to AI as one of the central figures in this story and its sort of multifaceted relationship to the characters?
Yeah, so one of the inspirations for this novel was just my own obsession with AI over the last few years. I teach at the University of Virginia, and seeing my students how their lives are being shaped by it in ways that they often don't recognize. And in this novel, in Culpability, I wanted to think about uh, all these different kind of species that are rising up around us and that we're creating in some ways. Whether it's autonomous vehicles, hands-free driving mode, whether it's the kind of the way that AI is intersecting with writing now in so many different ways with large language models like ChatGPT. There's even a smart home in the novel, and then chatbots, which are influencing our lives in so many different ways. And so I thinking about that, how those shape character, and also how AI, different forms of it, are becoming kind of indispensable to the way we live, often in ways that we don't realize. There's also a strand in the book that's about autonomous weaponry and modern warfare. I mean, it's not a techno thriller. It really is a family drama, a suspenseful family drama, but it's trying to think about this particular form of technology and how it interlaces through all of our stories, through the ways we relate to each other, our relationships with our loved ones, with our kids. And so I think it's tremendously complex. And like one of you was saying, this is my first time talking about the novel to anyone but my editor, basically, so far. So really, it's for me, I'm even as I'm talking about it, I'm trying to wrap my head around what these forces are doing to our lives. So that's really what the novel is trying to tackle.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Yeah, it is incredibly complex, and I love how AI relates separately and individually as well as kind of collectively to the story. So yeah, everyone grab it. Sarah and Mirta, both of your novels are ocean-centric and carry parallel timelines. Heads up to everyone else, they make amazing read-alikes. Can you each tell us about getting to the heart of the pull of the water? Sarah, can we start with you?
Sure. So I really think of the ocean as kind of a collision of ironies. And what I mean by that is many of us go to the ocean to seek solace. It's very mesmerizing, meditative. We might sit along watch a sunset and sort of go by ourselves and turn inward. But then the reality is the ocean can also be very unforgiving and treacherous. It has been the direct source of millions of deaths across history. And it's also a source of great mystery. Much of the ocean is unexplored. There are so many things. Experts believe there's more than $4 billion worth of unrecovered value on the seafloor. Not to mention all of these deep sea creatures that we see photos of. So it's two things at once. And I sort of loved playing with that irony in my story, and particularly Mari, the historical character who her birthright has given her so much power and control over the ocean, but she doesn't love it. She views it as a villain. There are a couple of scenes where the sea actually kind of helps her, or even saves her life in one instance. And so we see her complicated relationship with the story, or with the ocean, as the story progresses. So I loved exploring that tension and that irony. And, I live in Florida, so I'm just a few minutes from the water. But last year we had 2 hurricanes and I had water encroachment in my house from flooding. That's seawater. So it's really even an irony for me as an individual. I seek peace and solace from the ocean, but I'm also sometimes scared of it. So I enjoyed exploring that in fiction.
Thanks, Sarah. Mirta?
Yes, well, in my case, I grew up on an island in Cuba. And I left that island sort of like Ellen's mom, but not in first class, in 1980 on a boat named Mañana with my parents and younger sister. We were part of what came to be known as the Mariel boat lift, when more than 125,000 Cubans arrived in Key West in the span of 5 months in the spring and summer of 1980. Like one of my 2 main characters in the book, oh, and by the way, I should say, because it's my first book, that I related all of this in my first nonfiction book, which is called Finding Mañana, a memoir of the Cuban exodus. And this year is the 20th anniversary of that book. So, but anyway, like one of the 2 main characters in my book, Mara, I'm afraid of the ocean. I didn't even learn how to swim until I was pregnant with my first child. And I almost drowned, like one of my characters do in the book. In fact, in the exact same way. So yes, water has been a theme in my life. My ancestors come from the Canary Islands, an archipelago of 14 islands, some big, some small, off the coast of Africa that belongs to Spain. The first part of the book takes place in one of those islands, La Palma. And I think when you grow up on an island, water can be both your salvation and your barrier. It can trap you inside, or it can allow you to escape. Many Cubans have taken to the sea or to the water to escape to the United States, as I did. And more recently, many Africans have escaped oppression and poverty and taken to the water to get to the Canary Islands, coincidentally, and therefore Europe. The waters around Cuba, and I imagine around Africa as well, are a virtual cemetery. Honestly, I think about that every time I go in the water in the Caribbean. I know it's morbid, but I can't help myself. So it is, hugely important in my life in both good and bad ways.
Thank you so much, Mirta. These connections are just like truly mesmerizing to me, and I want to recommend every single one of these books to everyone here. You will not regret it. These are amazing reads, and it was a treat to be able to read all of them about the same time. I'm afraid we are out of time. I want to say thank you so much to all of you fantastic authors, and thank you to all the librarians for joining us today. Next, we have 3 concurrent panels: personal narratives, hearts on sleeves, and echoes of war. Please make sure to pick up these books and have a fantastic day of dialogue. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Great to meet you all.
You too.